Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in a new tomb he had cut out of the rock. Then he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and departed.
When the scanners began to operate, a dense, almost liturgical silence settled in the laboratory, as if the scientists themselves shared the solemnity that had always surrounded the Shroud of Turin. It was not, however, a matter of direct contact with the relic, something reserved for very rare occasions, regulated by strict Vatican protocols which limit any exposure or manipulation to the extreme. What rested before them were their digital replicas in very high definition, the result of photographic campaigns and official scans carried out under pontifical authorization. These images were not mere reproductions. Each pixel had been extracted with microscopic precision, recording not only the visible surface, but also the barely perceptible nuances of the fabric, the twisting of the linen fibers, the irregularities of the weave, the color variations, the burn marks, the historical patches, and the stains that spanned centuries. The result was a monumental collection of data which exceeded tens of terabytes, a relic transformed into pure digital information. It was like looking at a mountain range of data, said Spanish engineer Miguel Herrera, who is responsible for the project's technological architecture. You stop seeing a cloth and start perceiving an entire landscape made up of textures, densities, and shadows invisible to the human eye. For the researchers, the shroud no longer presented itself as an object of devotion or a fragment of ancient linen, but as a territory to be explored in depth, a three-dimensional map of microstructures that kept both the memory of physical events, such as fires and restorations, and the mark of something not yet explained, the printed image itself. The experience of analysis was no longer merely visual. It became almost geographical, as if it were possible to walk through the folds of the fabric through data, penetrate the veins of the fibers, and map the mystery in successive layers of information.
The embryo of the project emerged in 2022 from debates between an international group of scientists interested in exploring the boundaries between archaeology and data science. The field in question, known as archaeometry, is dedicated to applying physiochemical, statistical, and computational methods to understand objects from the past, from dating cave paintings to analyzing metals, ceramics, and archaeological textiles. The initial proposal was relatively modest, to use deep learning algorithms to detect patterns in ancient tissues. The objective was to see if a machine would be able to identify microscopic wear on the fibers, traces of biological contamination, or smoke residues and atmospheric pollution accumulated over the centuries. There was also an interest in recognizing forgotten weaving techniques capable of revealing trade routes, geographical origins, and cultural practices. In the middle of these discussions, someone asked the question that would change the course of the project. What if we applied this method to the Shroud of Turin? The idea sounded bold, even foolhardy. Many feared that any result would be immediately captured by religious debate, turning a technical study into ammunition for ideological disputes. The risk was real. A single misinterpreted graph could be seen as scientific proof of the Christian faith, or, conversely, as a definitive refutation of centuries of devotion. In both scenarios, the work would run the risk of ceasing to be a science and becoming a theological flag or a weapon of militant skepticism. But there was another current within the group that saw an unprecedented opportunity there. These researchers argued that algorithmic neutrality could bring a breath of freshness to the debate. Unlike an archaeologist who may be inclined to see authenticity, or a critic who looks for forgeries, the machine does not seek symbolic meaning. It only sees patterns, pixel distributions, statistical correlations. The group's coordinator, Italian researcher Elena Rossi, summarized this vision in a phrase that would become the motto of the project. A computer has no religion, no agenda. He does not look for Jesus in the cloth. It only looks for patterns. With this premise, the Shroud of Turin ceased to be just a religious icon or a historical enigma, to also become a computational object, a database capable of revealing information hidden in the fibers of linen, invisible both to the human eye and to the traditional lenses of science.
The first obstacle was not philosophical, but technological. How to translate into data language something as unique as the shroud. The team began the process by gathering a vast set of visual records obtained over decades. Digital photographs in very high resolution were incorporated, capable of capturing microscopic variations in color and texture. Multispectral scans, which explored the responsive tissue to different wavelengths, from ultraviolet to infrared, revealing patterns hidden to the human eye. In addition to microscopic images and forensic analysis produced in previous studies, each layer of information represented an additional dimension of the enigma. This data was organized and processed in convolutional neural networks, or CNNs, deep learning architectures inspired by the workings of the human visual cortex, recognized for their ability to identify complex and subtle shapes in noise. In order for the system to be able to discern accurately, it was necessary to undergo extensive training. Thousands of images of historical, modern, and artificial fabrics were inserted, covering examples with different types of stains, burnt fibers, pigments applied by artistic techniques, as well as natural wear. The goal was to teach the machine to create parameters of distinction. Just as a child learns to differentiate letters of the alphabet from repetitions, the neural network has been conditioned to recognize the invisible grammars of linen, the patterns of entanglement, the signs of organic aging, and external interferences. As researcher Herrera explained, it's like teaching a child to read, only instead of alphabets, AI learns to decipher microscopic weaves and scars from millennial fibers. In the next step, the system was adjusted to detect subtle variations in density and luminosity, imperceptible even in traditional analyses. Each microfluctuation in the tone of a fiber could carry meaning, signs of environmental contamination, marks of human repairs, signs of chemical degradation, or even, as it would later be discovered, three-dimensional information embedded in the very structure of the image. Thus, for the first time, it was not just a matter of observing the shroud with new instruments, but of teaching a machine to read what was hidden in the silence of the fibers, exploring invisible layers of information that could redefine centuries of debate.
In the first few days of processing, the results seemed predictable. Artificial intelligence was limited to identifying patterns that were already known and widely documented. The dark stains from the burns caused by the fire of Chambéry in 1532, the triangular patches sewn together by the Clarissa nuns, fragments of pollen compatible with species cataloged in different regions of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Nothing until then that could shake what was already established by decades of research. But in one of the simulations, something unexpected emerged. The algorithm, trained to interpret variations in tonal density as relief data, produced a rudimentary three-dimensional representation. Suddenly, what had previously been a flat figure on the linen gained depth. The nose projected clearly, the eye sockets formed cavities, the cheekbones acquired volume. The cloth seemed to cease to be just a two-dimensional surface, to become a digital sculpture. I remember staring at the screen in silence. It was as if the cloth had become flesh and blood, as if it were in front of a marble bust, recalls researcher Rossi. I had known about the three-dimensional hypothesis since the VP8 experiments in the 1970s,
but to see it emerging with such precision was disturbing. As adjustments to the model followed, the digital portrait gained complexity. It was no longer a generic or idealized figure. The simulation began to exhibit cranial asymmetry compatible with real human faces, the subtle curvature of the nose, the irregular but coherent line of the lips, nuances that went beyond the idea of a religious icon and approached a historical face. What was most impressive was the absence of artificiality. Unlike artistic works that tend to embellish or even out features, the reconstruction suggested by the AI had plausible imperfections, small irregularities that gave the figure verisimilitude. It was as if the shroud contained, hidden beneath its burnt and weathered fibers, a human portrait encoded in depth, waiting only for the right lens to be revealed.
As the algorithm advanced over the digitized fabric, it became clear that the shroud did not hold just one face, but an entire body inscribed in subtle detail. The chest, for example, revealed a surprising anatomical definition, with muscular grooves outlined in a way that was incompatible with a simple painting or handmade print. The arms appeared crossed over the pelvis, in a resting position that coincided with historical descriptions of Jewish funerary rites of the 1st century, but also with iconographic representations of the crucifixion. Even more intriguing were the circular markings on the wrists, aligned with the hypothesis of penetrating wounds. Injuries compatible not with medieval iconography, which depicted nails in the palms of the hands, but with modern medical studies on the anatomical feasibility of crucifixion. The algorithm, by highlighting these areas, seemed to reinforce the notion that the details exceeded the inventiveness of a medieval forger. When the scientists applied spectral distribution analysis to the spots, the interpretation became even more enigmatic. The pattern did not correspond to pigments absorbed by the fabric, but to an alteration restricted to the most superficial layer of the flax fibers, as if there had been a chemical or energetic modification that did not penetrate deeply. Instead of ink strokes, the AI suggested subtle gradations compatible with a type of energetic exposure. This result brought new strength to hypotheses that had been circulating since the 1970s. Some physicists had argued that the image could have been produced by a brief and intense discharge of energy, perhaps an emission of ultraviolet radiation or an electromagnetic pulse, capable of imprinting the shape of the body without tearing or destroying the tissue. Until then, this idea remained more in the speculative field. Now, algorithmic analysis offered objective clues that made such a theory more plausible. Spanish physicist Miguel Herrera, one of the team's members, commented on the findings in a cautious tone. "We can't say what caused this change, but the algorithm demonstrated that the pattern is not random. There is a coherence in the distribution, as if the energy had been emitted from the inside to the outside of the body." Thus, AI not only magnified the sharpness of the image, but also reignited old philosophical and theological questions. If there really was an energetic event, what nature would it have been? A natural process still unknown to science, or a singular phenomenon interpreted by faith as the instant of resurrection?
Still, the discovery represented a paradigm shift. Until then, interpretations of the shroud oscillated between human descriptions, marked by subjectivity, and photographs that, however impactful, were still products of the human gaze and its technical limitations. Now it was the machine, impersonal, algorithmic, incapable of faith or skepticism, that evidenced something extraordinary. An ancient fabric carrying three-dimensional information encoded in its own image. This data changed the horizon of the discussion. Three-dimensionality was not the result of a psychological perception, nor of an artistic artifice. It was mathematically inscribed in the variations in the intensity of the fabric. The image seemed to contain a topographic map of a human body, something that went beyond the notion of simple representation. Here's the irony. The most sophisticated technology of the present seemed to reveal a complexity that was impossible to conceive of in the past. Not even the Renaissance masters, with all their mastery of perspective and anatomy, would have been able to create a representation that, centuries later, could be read by algorithms as a coherent three-dimensional model. This finding has led scholars to a curious dilemma. If the shroud were really a medieval forgery, whoever produced it would have used optical and physical techniques that we only understand now, in the age of computer science. Historian Giuseppe Rossi summed up this perplexity well when he commented, "If it's a medieval forgery, then it was made by someone who knew techniques that we've only discovered now with artificial intelligence. And that in itself is already extraordinary." Thus, even among the most skeptical, the revelation commanded respect. Whatever its origin, the shroud is an artifact that pushes the boundaries of its time, challenging both the artists of the past and the scientists of the present.
They called it a miracle, a fraud, an icon. But no term sums up what the Shroud of Turin really is: a mirror of humanity, of our thirst for meaning, of our need to believe, to doubt, to seek. If AI has revealed something new, if each future analysis can shake old certainties, it is because this cloth forces us to see beyond what we should see. If you liked it, were restless, moved, like this video, share it with those who love mysteries that touch the soul. Sign up to follow the next chapters of The Search. What would you feel facing the face of the shroud face to face? Leave it in the comments. I want to know your vision. Until the next video, where we're going to go through more shadows and turn on new lights.